Good morning. This is one of my favorite parts of my job, is visiting the churches and the schools. And I don't say that like, oh, I jump at the chance, because I always go, oh, but I just love to be here, and I love to see the congregations and worship with others. It touches me so much. Well, I'm going to spare you this morning. I'm not going to play this flute for you. It's a good thing, trust me. I actually use it just as a little object lesson here because a long time ago, when I was very young, in school they often want to see what kind of instrument your mouth would, do the best job at, and so they either put you with trumpets and French horns and things, or they put you with flutes. And so I ended up having the right pucker for a flute. And so I played in the little beginning band, and I didn't practice. I hope the young people in here are shutting their ears, because this is not the way it should be done, okay? I didn't practice. I didn't take lessons. I just went to the beginning band every day and played with the band. And so, of course, I didn't, progress very well, and my heart really wasn't in it. It wasn't my passion. So a couple of years later, I think I was about going into 6th grade, our school was given 3 scholarships to a very prestigious music place called the Interlochen Fine Arts Academy. Have anyone ever heard of that? It's up in northern Michigan, and it's very prestigious. Kids come from all over the world to perform there in all the fine arts. And so I, of course, was not selected. Another young lady from our school was selected, and she lasted 1 day because she got homesick. And, of course, they chose me to replace her, not because of my strong flute abilities, but because I could fit in the uniform that everybody had to wear. So I found myself sitting in this huge auditorium with, when you're little, everything seems big, but there probably were 300 kids, from all over the place at this camp, and we were preparing a presentation, a big concert for our parents. And the conductor would stand down in the middle. And the reason I'm doing this is because that's where I was seated. So they put the first seats in the middle of the band, and the second and the third ones are kind of out on the wing. I was out on the wing. In fact, I was way out on the wing. And at one point, he took his baton and he rapped it on the podium and stop. And he points up here to the flute section, and I was like, oh, you just like, oh no. So he calls out the first flutes to play the little stanza. It was beautiful, And then he calls out the second flutes to play. It was very nice, And then he calls the third flutes, and it was horrible, right? But that wasn't the worst part. I can handle this little man down there, going, ah. But it was, horrible. I don't know. Is there anybody in here that's 11, 12 years old? Anybody? Okay, 10? Somewhere in there? So you're getting my drift when I say, would you like 300 kids to laugh at you? All right. And I had to survive that whole week, It was the most embarrassing, humiliating moment for me. And, instantly you're just flooded with this, oh, that was horrible. Oh, you're just so ashamed, can't hold your head up. And that stuck with me. Do you think that I really ever wanted to touch my flute again? Not so much, right? I did, but it was not, trust me, not out of passion, right? It became an object, a symbol to me of a horrific emotional experience that left ties in my brain that made me, I don't want to touch this thing, right? I did end up playing for 1 more year later. When I was in 10th grade, I had a 1-year opportunity, which was a life-changing opportunity, to spend a year at an Adventist academy up in Michigan. It was called Cedar Lake Academy. Now it's Great Lakes Academy. That was my one and only Adventist school experience. And it changed my life. I'll talk about those kinds of things in a little while, but I never forgot that. I never got away from this. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. I'm going to talk to you about how emotions can change our brain and affect the way that we make choices later on. So if you'll just bow your heads, I just want to have one more short prayer. Dear Lord, I want to thank you again that I can be here. And I pray, Lord, that you will be here, because my words mean nothing. It is only when you are present that hearts are touched. And I'm praying for you to touch our hearts today, Lord, and come into this room and be with us now. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. So we live in a world of choices, right? We're constantly making choices, and here's my little flute story. You know, I experienced some of these emotions about the flute, joy and peacefulness, and then turned to fear and anxiety. So how does that reflect or affect the choices that we make? Because we're always making choices. They say that the average adult makes about 35,000 choices a day. Now, it seems like a lot, but you think about it. Literally everything you do is a choice of one magnitude or another, right? How much toothpaste you're going to put on your toothbrush, which foot I'm going to put down on the stair first, how long I'm going to sweep my kitchen floor. It doesn't matter. Everything is at least an unconscious choice that we're making. And then, of course, we have to make big decisions too, right? About homes and jobs and spouses and where to put our kids in school, just, you know, all kinds of choices. They say, however, that a young person, a young child, only makes about 3,000 choices a day. So you can see that during those formative developmental years, there's going to be a lot of changes going on in the brain, right? There's going to be so much brain formatting. I guess that would be like the tech-savvy term to use for it, because our brains are being formatted all the time by the choices that we make. When we make choices, it's creating patterns or pathways in our brains that become our habits of mind, right? There are two main parts of making a decision. There's what's called the value-based assessment, and be with me on this, because I know that you do this, everybody does it, we just don't think about what we're doing, right? So this is where you think about the risks and the rewards of a decision. What's going to take place if I do this? What's going to happen if I do this? Maybe you think about a past experience and a similar choice that you made. How did it turn out, right? If it was positive, then you might lean in that direction. If it was negative, you might lean in a different direction. And we gather information from our senses all the time too, right? All these things come into play to help us make what we call an informed decision. If you're going to buy a new car or something, you want an informed decision to be made, right? You don't want to just walk on the lot and say, let's see, I'm in a blue mood, I'll take that one, right? You want to know about the car. So we're very logic-based people. And then there's the part called cognitive control. This is where we try to kind of put all the other distractions aside. We try to ignore any impulses, because impulsive decisions don't often work out really well, do they? This is where we kind of weed out all the external things that are happening and kind of get back to, okay, I got to make a value-based assessment here. So these two things are the main critical things that are happening when we make a decision. Helps us to set our boundaries here on our decision making. When you think about the rich young ruler, this picture actually reminds me very much of my experience in Battle Creek. I lived there for years. If you've ever been to the Battle Creek Tabernacle, this mural is this huge mural in the front of the church. I see a nod here, so he knows what I'm talking about. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. But as you're sitting there and you're there every Sabbath and you're looking at that mural, you notice the rich young ruler's that eternal decision that he's making right there, right? He made a choice that day. And he had asked Jesus, well, what must I do to be saved? And Jesus said, well, you need to follow my commandments. And the rich young ruler said, well, which of these? And Jesus said, well, thou shalt not steal, and thou shalt not commit adultery, and thou shalt not kill. And he listed them, and the rich young ruler, thinking, he's got his wheels in motion, he said, but I'm doing all of this. What am I missing here? I'm missing something, because this isn't working for me right now. And Jesus said, sell everything that you have, give it to the poor, and come and follow me, right? At that point, the rich young ruler had a very big decision to make. It was an eternal decision, right? You and I are making this choice every day. We are deciding what we're going to do with Jesus. Are we going to love him, take him into our hearts and our lives, or are we going to reject him? We are training our brains every day to make what I call, what other people may have called before, God-shaped choices. Are they the kind of choices that are leading us to an eternity in heaven? Unfortunately, he didn't make a God-shaped choice, did he? No, he turned away because he had too much to lose. When we look at the physiology of what's happening in the brain when we make a decision, there's a lot going on, really. You can see the purple area as the frontal lobe. That's the place in our brain where we're making judgments, we're planning, where our personalities form, where our real thinking goes on. And then you think about all the things in life that we're doing to destroy our frontal lobes. It's kind of scary, isn't it? We're seeing the effects of it every day in our society and maybe in our own lives. But in the frontal lobe, that's where this critical decision-making happening takes place. But there's something else that's going on. Down behind the ears, kind of towards the back of the neck, there are two little organs called the amygdala. They're a little bit larger in men. The amygdala, their job is to respond in situations where there is a heavy emotion, a passionate emotion, fear, anxiety, when you're just very afraid of anything, the amygdala go into action, and their job is to release an instantaneous amount of neurons, nerve messages to the neurons that just travel through the brain, and it kind of excite the brain into releasing all kinds of chemicals like cortisol, adrenaline, peptides, hormones. So if you're kind of putting together what's happening here, let's say you have a situation where you're very afraid. Instantly, the amygdala send these messages through your brain, release the chemicals all over your brain, and suddenly your brain is not making a logical decision anymore, is it? It's making a decision based on emotion. These are rash decisions, right? Anybody in here ever made a rash decision? I know I have, right? And then you think about, like, how logical is a decision that's made in a moment of terror or a moment of anger? Are they normally really good decisions? Not usually, right? Because they're rash. They're based on the emotional flood. And here's the really scary part. The more that happens, the more the brain naturally takes those same pathways, even when the flood of emotions is not so strong. That's scary, isn't it? We're basing our emotions or our decisions based on emotion. In the logical side of the brain, you see, when we're thinking in our logical brain, we're able to take things in chunks. We're able to analyze things. We're able to take it more progressively, a little slower, right? But when the emotions are flooding our brain, suddenly everything is just one big picture. You ever been really afraid? What are you afraid of? I don't know, I'm afraid of everything, right? Because it's just big. It's like you can't think outside of that because you truly, physically can't. The emotions have taken over because of all the chemicals flooding your brain. It also makes you kind of summarize the situation and put it in one specific category. Here's a little bit of research that kind of proves this point, just how powerful this is. They had a group of kids that were like 8 to 14 years old, and they didn't starve them, but they didn't give them any food for about 3 hours, which is starving for some kids, right? But they just wanted them to be a little bit hungry, so their appetite was present. And then they, made sure they had a good relationship with their mom. I'm not sure how they determined that, but they said, the child and the mom had a good relationship. And the kids knew what was termed a healthy food versus a non-healthy food, okay? And then they had to rate the foods based on whether they were healthy or not healthy, and whether they taste good or not good, and whether they would choose it, liked it or disliked it. They were never offered any food, which I think is important because, if you're a kid especially and you're offered something that, hits home, you might be swayed by that, right? But they didn't have any incentive. And the kids chose for themselves, first of all, what they thought about it, and then what they think their mom would think about it. Okay? So they divided this into two categories. And what do you suppose the results were? The kids didn't rely on what they knew. They chose based on what was pleasurable and good to them. And that even overrode what they knew their moms would want. Now, probably somewhere in the back of their minds, their mom is saying, don't choose the cotton candy. Choose the broccoli, right? But that didn't matter. What mattered was their own tie to their own pleasure that they knew they would get in eating that particular food. It overrode even what mom had taught them. Even though they loved their mom and had a good relationship with them, it didn't matter. Emotions are so powerful. They're affecting our choices all the time. You see, knowledge is really easily accessible these days, but emotions have run rampant. I mean, look at the news, right? We know this is so true. I mean, who in their right mind, what we're really saying is their logical brain, right, would take a loaded weapon into a facility where there's a bunch of people and randomly wound or attempt to kill people? Does that make any sense at all? It makes zero sense. They know that logically speaking, they know they're going to die or they're going to go to prison, right? That makes absolutely no sense to me. It can't make good sense to them if they were in their logical brain, but what are they acting on? Emotions, right? Somebody has pumped them up so much, whether it be from an outside source, someone actually telling them and feeding them things, or media, or music, or video games, whatever it is, something has caused their emotions to peak to the point where they no longer can think in their logical brain, and they cannot make what I call a God-shaped choice. Because, of course, that's not a God-shaped choice to go hurting people. We're lacking that cognitive control. Here's another example. How many of you know somebody who's been in a workplace for a really long time, and it's not really a good environment? It's not like a beneficial job. They're not working their way up the ladder. They're not making tons of money. The incentives are almost invisible. Do you know somebody like that? Why then do they stay in a job that they really have no benefit doing so? Because there's something else going on, right? So my son Cody was in the Navy for 4 years as a submarine mechanic. And when he got out, so I'll tell you this, I was born and raised in Michigan, but for the last 4 years, my husband and I had the privilege of living out in Colorado. So he got out during that time. He came out to live in Colorado with us because he was a little lost. He wasn't really sure what he wanted to do. So he gets a job. He's pretty desperate to get a job. He gets a job working for a man who owned an industrial painting company. And they would paint these huge, to me, ugly pieces of stuff, just pipes and tanks and nothing exciting, nothing that made any, great impact in my life, I'll tell you that. But he would get inside these tanks, and over where we lived in Colorado, we were on the western slope near Utah. It's hot, and it's dry. It's like deserty. It's not like, you picture the mountains and skiing and all that. Yeah, you can get to those, but you're in the desert. And it was very hot. He would have to get in these tanks and hold this big hose that shot out these 80-pound bags of sand and sandblast. He used to get up in the mornings and have to pry his fingers open because his hands got so stiff from doing that all day long every day. His boss was not a really nice guy. He was younger. He was probably less than 35. He wasn't very nice. I mean, he didn't treat Cody really well. Cody had no benefits at this job. He didn't get paid well. So you're asking yourself, why in the world did he stay? Because the average worker stayed doing that job 6 months there. Cody stayed 2.5 years. Why? Because Justin, the boss, had a father named Jimmy who worked there. And Cody loved Jimmy. Jimmy encouraged him. He had fun with him. He made light of the job. He looked forward to, I think misery loves company, so they'd, horse around at work. And he made light of the days for Cody. And so Cody felt very secure in that job, and he felt very relational towards Jimmy. So he stayed 2.5 years. And he had a job offer in between that offered benefits and more money, but he turned it down, What got him to move and change jobs? When we decided we were moving to Indiana. Think about that. It was a stronger emotional tie. Jimmy or my mom and dad? Okay, mom and dad. So he now lives in southern Michigan near my other son. But it takes something very powerful to break emotional ties, right? They're so strong in our lives. Surveys have showed that this is not just Cody's case, but many cases. So what happens when we have floods of emotions? And I hate to say it, but I'm sure there's people sitting in this room that know what I'm talking about when I talk about the way you were raised. And I talk about maybe emotions being a huge part of a negative aspect of your life and the way you were raised. It leaves a residue, right? It leaves those pathways, create those habits of mind. You could read this with me. When someone experiences something that gets attached to an emotion, it leaves a strong record in the brain. When that person encounters a similar set of circumstances, it brings up the memory along with the associating emotions, which could be positive or negative. So you're thinking of like, you smell bread, you think of sweet grandma, right? You know how this works, right? There's ties. It is the emotional memory, however, that will affect the decisions, not logic. Wow, right? You see what we're doing? We're making decisions based on emotion, and then we back it up with logic, right? Honey, I bought this today. Why? Well, it was on sale. Well, the other one's wearing out. Well, it's my favorite color, right? We back things up. It's called rationalization. Anybody with me? We're doing this. We do it all the time. We don't think about it, but we do it all the time. So where's the good news in this? Where's hope for us when we know that we're unduly under the power of emotion, that emotions are changing the way that we think and do things? The balance comes in faith. And I actually heard something this morning in Sabbath school class, and I actually, in my personal devotions aside, I'm doing a read through the Bible, HMS Richards walk through the Bible thing, and I was actually in Job even before this quarter had started with Job being the topic of the Sabbath school. And it was so interesting to me because Job himself said a couple things that really tie into this. He said, though he slay me, yet will I trust him, right? The faith part. Though it looks this way, though I feel like this, though I feel like my world has completely crumbled, I'm going to choose the Lord, right? I know what? A gentleman said it in Sabbath school this morning. I know my Redeemer lives. Amen, right? So we have to grasp hold of the logic part. That's the balance, is our faith, our knowledge in Jesus, our knowledge in what we have. And this is why. Here's my education superintendent part coming out. This is why it's so important for our kids to be in our schools, that they're being trained up 7 days a week, 365 days a year, in home and at school, 24 hours a day. Because if you don't have the knowledge base, how are you supposed to make these knowledge or logic-based decisions, these God-shaped choices in life? How are we supposed to do that? I made a huge mistake. I was a single mom for quite a while. I had gotten divorced, gone to Andrews to go to school, and before I did that, I was living up in Traverse City, Michigan, and I had 3 boys, and I had put them in the church school up the road, which was, you've probably never been there, but it's way out, back then, it was way out in the country. It was not like an easy location. I was working as a bank teller. I was just over my head in stress of being a single mom and raising 3 boys and trying to put food on the table and all this. I had my boys in the church school. Well, they became disenchanted with that because we were living in a neighborhood full of people that were not Christians. You know, we lived in an apartment complex, and so they were being influenced all the time. And they talked me into letting them go to the public school down on the corner for a year. Well, I listened because why? Not because it was logical, but because I rationalized the logic, right? Emotionally, oh, that'd be so much easier. The bus would pick them up and drop them off. Oh, it's right nearby. Oh, 1 year. Oh, they're young. Oh. And I made it work, right? For me, up here. And I sent them for a year. And during that time, they were, I don't want to say indoctrinated, because I don't want to make it sound like that. I know there are kids that have to go to public schools, and there's wonderful public schools and teachers out there. But for me, as an Adventist mom, that was like they came home with the seeds in their hearts and in their minds that I could not get rid of, ever. Now, I want to tell you that, they went back to Adventist school. We moved away. We moved down to Andrews. I got my teaching degree. I'm so thankful that there were dedicated teachers at that school and a principal who I knew from Traverse City who made sure, because financially it was tough. I was going to school 20 hours a week. I was working 20 hours a week, taking care of 3 kids. I had zero anything, energy, money, time, you name it, right? He made sure that my kids got to have that Adventist education. I cleaned bathrooms at the school in between classes and in between shifts so that my kids could be in that school. And that didn't even begin to cover the cost, but they saw my devotion, they saw my sacrifice, and they said, well, I'm going to make this work for you, and they did. And my kids ended up graduating, all 3 of them, from Battle Creek Academy, where I went and became a teacher there, went through the rest of their schooling there. Praise God, right? But I want to tell you, I never, even through high school, every single year when it was time to register, Mom, can we go to public school this year? No, I'm an Adventist teacher here. Don't even talk to the hand, right? I didn't want to hear about it, right? But it never went away because they had those things planted from early on that kept that hunger for something, quote, better, they thought, right? We have to have faith. When I was at Andrews and I was taking my teaching degree, I had to take a class that made me write a prayer for my kids. And I share this because I want you to know. So my dad married an Adventist woman when I was 11, and that was how I ended up at an Adventist school for 1 year. They fell away. They fell away from the church. They're divorced now, kind of Adventist-y on the sides, if you get my drift. But they're not like super committed. And, it was an ugly divorce. And so I wrote this prayer, not being raised on Adventist beliefs, not being raised on Bible stories. My dad, my mom, they're wonderful, but they did not raise me up in a biblical atmosphere. Nothing. And so when I went to Andrews and I decided I was going to be an Adventist teacher, I didn't, I had done my little bits of study through the years, but when you have 3 boys and you're a single mom and you're working and you're da-da-da-da-da, you don't have like hours and hours, right? And I didn't know that I needed that. I didn't know. And so I wrote this prayer, but I want you to hear it because even back then, God gave me a dose of faith in my prayer that I believe has made a difference in their lives. Heavenly Father, as your daughter, I ask these things on behalf of my 3 sons, Tyler, Seth, and Cody. Please, O Lord, be their father, imparting upon them all the loving guidance, knowledge, and discipline that they will need to be men of God. Give them the desire to make a positive effort in everything that they do, no matter how large or small the task. Keep them safe and out of the hands of evil and harm, and send your angels to surround them and guide their footsteps. Give them wisdom to make good choices, Lord. And by your grace, may you forgive them when they fail. Continuously strengthen them and let them be mighty enough to stand up for you and the principles that you stand for. Help them to be courageous as they make their way in this world, and please light their path with the light of your awesome love. Teach them to be patient and to have faith in your good works. Help them to be gracious and kind to others, seeking to show the world your love through their actions. Never let them forget how it feels to be hurt, betrayed, or left out, that they might treat others the way they want to be treated. Help them to trust in you, that they may be trustworthy, loyal, and honest no matter what the situation. Give them an understanding of your will and the desire to seek it. I did not pray for my kids to be prestigious, wealthy, to have pools in the backyard, 2 new cars in the driveway, vacations to, who knows where every year. I didn't pray that. I prayed outside of these earthly choices. I prayed for God-shaped choices for them, that they would be in heaven, that they would have a relationship with Jesus. That is what Adventist education does for us. That is what Adventist homes, committed, loving Christian homes, do for our kids. When we think about Joshua in the Bible, when I first read this, it hit me, probably because I was so, focused on this idea that emotions drive our choices. And it's hard to make God-shaped choices when we're flocked with emotion and when we don't take time and let the emotions cool down and get into our logical brain, right? So Joshua lays out the logic for his people. He's getting old. He knows he's going to die soon. And he logically takes them through a whole chapter previous to this of history of how God has worked in their lives, how he has saved them and protected them even when they were worshiping idols and choosing other gods. Even through all that, how God had been with them and been by their side, and how they were basically, there was nothing without God, right? He's asking them to consider what they know. And then I feel like, maybe this isn't just me picking this up, but if I was Joshua, if I'd have been there and heard Joshua, I would have felt like this is what he was trying to say here. So I've just given you the lowdown of how wonderful God is, and if this seems evil to you then to serve him, then you do what you're going to do. But for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. If it seems evil, if it feels bad, if it doesn't feel just right to you because you might not have that pool in the backyard or this or that, if it just seems bad to you because it doesn't feel right, then you do what you're going to do. But I'm going to serve the Lord because Joshua was focused on the knowledge of what God had done for his people and will continue to do in the past, right? We'll continue to do in the future. Sorry. So the best example I can give today of like a personal testimony of a God-shaped choice is the life of my son Tyler. So we were, we were at Andrews still, and he developed a little tumor in his spinal cord. It was about the size of a sausage link, and it was right up beside his spinal cord. And they operated and took it out and tested it and said it was some weird kind of benign tumor, fatty tumor, and not to worry too much and everything. Great, wonderful. A year later, he starts having more pain. So he's like 14, okay? More pain, kind of weird feeling. He's like, Mom, I can feel that again. We go back. They do MRI, find out this time it has donutted around his spinal cord and it's like pinching it. And he was like, having symptoms, falling, and he couldn't walk, and no balance, and all this weird stuff going on. And so the doctor said, you know what, this thing's more aggressive than we first thought. I'm going to send you to an oncologist, and they're going to probably do some radiation and have a little bit more complicated surgery and stuff. So they sent us to Pittsburgh, where we had surgery, removed the tumor, and they radiated it, so to make sure that it destroyed any bad cells. And when we went, we met this wonderful surgeon, renowned children's surgeon, had done many surgeries like this. His name was Leland Albright, and he let us pray with him before the surgery. He was just a wonderful man. I felt, very safe and secure. And Tyler came out of surgery doing great and everything. So when we went back to see the oncologist, when it was all done, she said, "You know what? I'm just not going to sleep until 3 years have gone by, because that thing was a little ugly this time, Like, okay, well, those words in the back of a mother's head, you never forget that. So 2 3/4 years later, I'm going to back up actually about 3 months before that, I had just married my husband, Terry. And so I had my 3 boys, and he has a daughter, so we were, just settling in, just starting to settle in. But I was deeply troubled because now, this is Tyler's senior year of high school. And I'm like watching my son, the firstborn, the one who's going to leave my house first, go out into the world, and he'd never really given his heart to the Lord. And I knew it. And I was watching him make choices that were not anywhere near God-shaped. In fact, I knew he was up to no good. And I was really worried. My heart was heavy, and I said to my husband, "Please, can we pray for Tyler? I can't stand this." So we went to the chapel at the school, and we didn't just pray. We pled with God, and we cried. And we just, searched our own lives and our own hearts, and we said, "Please, God, interrupt him. Get his attention before it's too late. Be careful what you pray for." So now, this was like in August. So now November comes. We go for that 2 3/4 year checkup. And we went to the MRI and then directly to the oncologist's office after that because, there wasn't any real reason of suspicion or anything. Tyler had some weird pain the year before, and we'd had it checked again. They did an MRI and said everything looked good. It just must be a lot of scar tissue building up and stuff. So he kind of constantly had weird pain, so he just got used to it, So we sit in her office, and she's doing all these tests on him and squeeze this and, the knee, all this stuff. And she says, "He looks great." And Tyler was like, I say this from a mom's heart, but I would have others who would testify. He was a little charmer. He was really handsome. And he had this smile that just spelled mischief, But it was never like in a mean way. He just loved to play with people. He loved people. He was very charismatic. The girls loved him. They called him the chick magnet. He just had a way with people, and it didn't matter. It didn't matter who the person was. He made every girl feel pretty. You know what I mean? He just made everybody feel like they were just the best. So people loved him, So we, she's doing these tests and telling him everything's great and wonderful and everything. And we leave the office and we're like, "That's so good, on with life." So a week later, we were actually, I think, on our way over to the school for something. And I get a call from her, and it was very quiet, She's like, "So I am so sorry. I did not look at that MRI because until just now, I didn't have any reason to. He looks great. But that stuff, it's all over the place." We're like, okay, so on began a year of right? You can imagine. And now it's just like every other person's going through this, it feels like, right? Everybody in here knows a neighbor, a friend, a relative, a coworker, somebody who's going through this. So we had to go back out to Pittsburgh. We spent our first Christmas as a married couple in Pittsburgh in a children's hospital. And before surgery, we prayed with the doctor again, or I did. And actually, it was different this time. He was really busy. And I actually had to talk to him on the phone. He didn't have time. And I said, "Can I pray with you?" And he's like, yeah, sure. And so I prayed with him. But I could just tell that he was nervous about this too. It was anytime you get near someone's spinal cord, it's not a light thing, right? brain, spinal cord, right? So about halfway through the surgery, he comes out and he's just like this, and he says, so I was, I had my little blade. I was cutting through the scar tissue to get where I needed to go, and I nicked the spinal cord. So there's going to be a little weakness. And so in my ignorance, I did not know that weakness meant paralyzation, but that's what it meant. So we go to the recovery room, and my son's laying there awake, and he says, Mom, I can't move my legs. And I'm like, okay, I know, honey, I know, it's going to be okay, we'll get through this. And so you're just like, oh, Lord. Deep breath, right? So we had to be, because of the fragile state of his spinal cord at that point, we had to be med-jetted to Mary Free Bed in Grand Rapids, where Tyler spent the next 3 or so weeks learning how to be paralyzed, because there's a lot to know, You're no longer using your legs. And, he got through that. It was very, very, very dark. That's all I can tell you, because he was not relying on God at that point. All he knew was that it was his senior year of high school. He's now paralyzed, and life just flipped upside down. It was bad enough that the stuff was back, but now he couldn't walk. And Tyler was like active, a little wiry thing, active. This was like someone just pulled the rug out from underneath him. So he's finishing up his senior year of high school, and we had to do lots of treatments and stuff. It was pretty much a nightmare. And his class, precious, precious class. They just embraced him. They loved him anyway, but now they just were there for him. And they would just do special things for him. At his graduation, he didn't actually earn his degree because he had missed so much school, because even when he was home, he didn't feel well enough to go all the time. But later they gave him an honorary degree. But he got to graduate, with the class, and they built a ramp up the stage for him, and they carried him up the ramp, and it was just precious. But then the really hard time hit, because now it's summer. He's not seeing his friends every day. And here he is feeling worse every day, and he's doing chemo, and he's doing, every treatment we could get our hands on, and he's like, it's dark, There's no hope for him at this point in his mind. Emotions were clearly what was, his frame of mind at that point. It was an emotional solitude. He was depressed. It was just horrible. All of his friends were making plans to go off for college. He didn't even know what to make a plan to do. No clue. So, one day I was reading to him, and lots of people were reading to him, and lots of people were praying with him, and my husband was ministering to him, and, nobody let him just stay in that state. But I was reading to him from the Ministry of Healing, and I just randomly one day happened to read, God has a plan, right? Read to him a paragraph that basically says, God will not heal you so you can go back to the way you were. Tyler just looked at me. Mom, I would go back. I would. If this is what God has to do to heal me, I'll do it. So he trudged through the summer in this terrible state, all this stuff going on, gave his heart to the Lord, and was baptized with his brother, and witnessed to doctors, nurses, oncologists, physical therapists, you name it. He witnessed to people, classmates, because some of them did come still and visit him and stuff, right? Well, he was anointed, and he was healed spiritually, but he wasn't healed physically. He passed away. It's been almost 12 years ago. But the reason I tell you this story is, can you think of anything that would come in your life that would be worse to have to make a God-shaped choice over? And when he decided that, he did not know he was going to die. They were still very hopeful in doing treatments. He knew he was probably going to be paralyzed, but even then he had some periodic signs of life coming back in his legs. He could feel one, and he could move one and feel like pressure on the other. It was really strange, because the body wants to heal, right? It's working. But he made a God-shaped choice. That didn't happen overnight. That was years of prayer for him, even though he wasn't praying. That was Bible knowledge, right? Logic coming into his life, even though he wasn't even accepting it at the time. When it all came down, push came to shove, all that came flooding back. Train up a child, right? It is there, and that's why it is so critical for this little school over here in Amber. I just love what you're doing, We're so thankful for you because teachers don't just teach, guys. It is a sacrifice. It is a lifestyle. And I'm not just thankful for her. I'm thankful for all of you, for Nancy and Carol, all the people that help make this school work, for all the volunteers, for the aides, for your dollars. Your dollars make a difference in supporting that school. Your time, your energy, your prayers, your appearance. Have you ever thought about just asking Amber if you could come in and read to the kids one day? Share your story. Tell them what Jesus means to you. Tell them about how God has changed your life and is working in your life. Testimony, personal testimony, Ellen White says it's the most powerful tool we have, right? Yet how often do we use it? You're a living testimony being in the pew every week, and when you smile at that child, even when they're running around, even when they're writing on your wall, God's got a plan for them. Don't you want to be a part of that plan? What fun will heaven be without all of us there? Right? We have to carry that burden. So I'm asking you today, if there's a God-shaped choice that you need to make in your life, that you will apply what you know, that you will think about the logic, and you will think about eternity as you make that decision. Thank you so much.